Hey, it's Mac with PriceActionTradingSystem.com, and it's Wednesday. It's April 11th. This will be our chart lesson for the day, and it was mostly uphill today. We actually had a nice little uptrend, a correction, moved to a new high, and then we just kind of went flat. We did sell off a little bit as the day went on, and notice we traded down into this. And so generally, what will happen when you do succeed in breaking out of this range here, you'll trade to the downside. So that kind of gives you a downward bias. There's a couple of chances you might have considered long, but I think you're better off just to skip the longs here. There's not really any good long setups. We'll talk about that when we get to them. But you can see the tight channel working up, the close, moved to a new high, and it looked like we were going to sell off. There's a nice sell off here. You don't really get a good chance to enter this one because actually this one's way too steep, so we started leveling off, and this channel looks very valid, so you got to be careful going short here because you might get trapped on the short side and then it turned back up. But you end up getting one leg down, a little correction, then a second leg down, and then it reversed, made a new high off of the break, off the flatter channel, and then we kind of sold off after that. So the price action, everything worked out nicely today, as you would expect. And there's not as many trades a day. Seems like there's still some fairly, we got a little volatile. Seems like we get these little volatile periods. Of course, today was FOMC day, so you had to be a little careful right in here anyway. You really didn't want to enter from about, I would say, generally I'll say 12 noon, but if you get a good setup like this at 12:20 or so, I'd say you're probably okay. You just got to be really careful that you don't get stuck in a trade before FOMC comes out. So always keep that in mind. And that's probably why we went flat in here. People get leery around FOMC announcements, and so you got to be careful. But we got a little bit of a movement in here, but this didn't turn out to be anything too crazy today. I went ahead and marked this trade, but you might have sat still and just waited and not taken anything really after 12 o'clock. But there's a trade here. We'll talk about that one when we get there as well. So, but there's not a lot of trades today. It was kind of a, just there's not as many setups as we'd normally have. And you'll see a couple of shorts on here, but you got to be really careful shorting this stuff when you're in an uptrend. So we'll talk about those trades too when we get there. But it's not going to take as long today as some of these have because we didn't have quite the number of, the amount of movement and the number of setups. But when I came in, we were trading up and had started kind of going sideways. But notice we got this little short-term trend working up, and you get a first entry short, you try to go higher, and you get a second entry short, it fails and goes higher right there. Plus you got a little range, and you get a chance to get short at the very low of the range. Again, as I talked about with the other range, we traded up into this one, so you would, most of the time, if prices succeed in breaking out, they're going to go in the same direction they traded into it. That's not 100%, but you can pretty much count on that, and you'll be right most of the time. And if you measure that first leg, you can see that would give you a measured leg to right in here. We actually went further than that, but that gives you your first target right there. And you might consider this might be a reversal too, but so you get those two legs and you draw your trend line right here, and you're just waiting on prices to really kind of come back to your trend line again. And we actually get a little overshoot up here. You don't really get any other setups. We just go straight up, and there's really just not a chance to set up here. We get a little overshoot, and then you make a lower high with a very bearish bar, and you're a long way away from the EMA. So if you're wanting to be a little aggressive, plus let me back up here. There's a lot of resistance across there. You can see this resistance from earlier. And so that gives you more credence to that this is probably going to turn down here, at least go back to the EMA. So you might consider going short there. Let me try to make this a little bigger. It's still a little risky. I'd probably tell you just skip that trade, but hey, it's a quick, easy scalp, and you figure that's probably what's going to happen. You do get a close outside on this one and move to a new high, and notice you get that turn down, and then you get a lower high, and you're still way away from the EMA. You actually get a reversal pattern here, but right into that EMA, probably not going to take that one. So, and if you had have taken it, you'd have got burned. So notice we push on up here, we come back, we're still bouncing off the EMA, but the trend line's way over here. So I'm just not crazy about any of these moves. Then we start working sideways. There's actually a little drop outside of this little trading range, and this is a second entry long. Notice that high, you pull back first entry, pull back second entry. You could have considered taking that one if you got enough room to get out before this high, and you do, but you wouldn't have got in this one. It jumps. You notice that there's no overlap. It just pops up there and keeps going, and so you wouldn't really got a chance to get in it anyway, at least not on my chart. If your chart was different and you could get in there with enough room to get out, then I'd be okay entering that one. It's particularly considering we've already bounced off the EMA twice, and there's probably I'm sure there's a midline right in here. So there you can see that midline working up through there. That looks like about midpoint. So that's a bounce off the midline. So you could take that one. Again, I didn't mark it. I'm not crazy about it because we're way overdue to come back to the EMA. And notice what happens. Even though it would have worked, it falls just instantly. It turns down and it bounces off the trend line. That confirms your trend line. And you really could have gone short right here as well, because that does bounce off the trend line and confirm it. And that's a fairly bullish bar, so I should have at least made that one green. But I think you're better off to wait and see if you get a higher low. You actually get a higher low here, but you don't get a very good setup, and then you get your actual failed second entry short here with your reversal that we like to see. And again, everything's right off that trend line, so I like going long there for sure. And really, this one is, I should have marked that one at least green. And you could really argue for that because it's a failed break below all that support. Even though there's not a real clear range, you're kind of making higher highs. It's still, that support's strong, and this is an uptrend, and it does bounce off the trend line, the EMA, all that. So it's just a first entry though, but because it's a failed break below all that support, you could go long there, and you really could almost call that one blue. I'll leave it green, but you could call it blue. This was the better entry right here, and you still get the same move basically. You might have picked up an extra tick or two here, being a little aggressive. So generally, the smart traders are going to wait for the confirmation, and you don't really get that to here because this is not a very good setup here. And all those stems poking up there, just not a good setup. Even though it is a higher low, it's just not a very good setup. So, but we shoot up and then we turn down, and you get a little, I mean, depending on how you drew your line, you could almost get a close outside. It's questionable. It's not a convincing close really. And so you got to be careful short. And notice what happens. You turn down, first entry, you turn down, and you push through the EMA, pull back, and you confirm that trend line with a failed second entry long, a nice bearish bar. And the reason I'm okay with this one is because there is enough room to get out before you get back down to this trend line, if this trend line is correct, which it's hard to say if it's going to be correct right there or not, but I still like it. And so you might, if you got enough room to get out, you can take that one. And it was, and because notice what happens, it bounces right off the trend line and it confirms it. And then we're pushing up and you get a pullback right there, but notice how you got a three bars stacked up there. This is pretty much a doji. This, a lot of stems on both sides. You don't want to take that one. It works, but you don't want to take it. It's just not a good setup. And then we come up here and we definitely overshoot this up here. Originally I had this a little lower, and so this is probably an overshoot. I mean, it still fits in both places. I played with it a little bit just to see what I could come up with, see if maybe I had it wrong, but I still think it's an overshoot. And either way, it doesn't matter. Notice what happens. You push up first entry, then you try to go higher second entry, and you get a big bearish bar. And it's a big bar too, but you should be coming back to the EMA, or I'm sorry, the trend line here at a minimum. So I kind of like that one. And with it, and if this is an overshoot up here, we could just reverse, because you've had a break of this channel and a new high, and you've had an overshoot on this one, or a possible overshoot, because it's really hard to say. We don't have enough price action here to say this is for sure an overshoot, or if maybe this is just higher like so, because I had it fitting pretty much either way. And in the end, I really think it fits better right there. And so it's probably not an overshoot. Well, it's actually, I take that back. It still overshoots it a little bit. So, and I may not quite have my angle right on that channel, so who knows. But either way, and that's right into that EMA and right into the midline. So that's just a little, that's the reason this was going to, I can't help but leave it green, especially in an uptrend, because you're trying to pick a top, and that's never a winning strategy. And then notice what happens. You push down, you get a first entry, you pull back, you get a second entry. So you get a second entry there, but again, it's this first break for sure of this trend line. And, we've already had a pretty nice move down. Too many times this will break lower and then come back and then make that next leg down. So, and I don't like, it doesn't really matter about your signal bar on a trap, but I think that's just a little bit risky right there, especially with this. There's support here and there's support all the way across there, and it's just too risky in my opinion. If you'd had a really good setup bar right here, maybe maybe if enough room before getting to that next low, but you're going short right into a double bottom there, so I just don't think it's worth risking. And of course it does make a measured move once it breaks, but you don't know that ahead of time. And then we're moving down, and you get what looks like a close outside and new low, and you got two legs down. So there's a second entry long here, and then there's a higher low here. But again, it's just a little risky trying to go long there. You could argue for that one. I'd be willing to give it a green, but again, I think you're better off to wait on that reversal pattern. And notice we kind of get one here, but it can't push. Notice that it tries once, twice, three times, then it tries a fourth time before it breaks higher. That's too risky to try to go long right there. You really want to see this push above, or at least give you a really good setup, and that's just not one. So that's one to skip. And then we come back and we make a double bottom, but again, not a very good signal bar. But notice that's a double bottom, so that's a new low. Then now you push through the EMA, first entry short, second entry short, and notice you got a little trend line, and that confirms it too. There's your first couple swings. I originally drew it a little steeper, but I corrected it here. And either way, it's still a failed second entry short, and now you got reason to think long, and off it goes. And that turns out to be a great trade. You could have caught a runner there. You don't really get another good opportunity here. You bounce off the trend line right here, but you don't have a very good signal bar. It's a first entry. We've already got a new high in place after the break. So this thing could reverse. It could go one tick higher and reverse or whatever. And so you got to be you really want to wait on a reversal pattern before getting short here now. But at the same time, you got to be real careful going long. You want perfect setups from this point on. You got a little trap here. So, and there is a new low here, and so first entry, second entry, and that's a fairly decent bar. It actually broke above this bar first and came back and then traded back up. So that one was kind of interesting. I didn't mark it, but you could argue for that one. It does fit, but you don't have a whole lot of room to get out there. I think there is enough room, but it's pressing it. And notice how close to that high you are right there, and it could be that I've pushed this too high now. So I think that one's really risky, and because now you got a break and a new high. And so, but that does fit our criteria. And look how it's bouncing off that midline, if that midline is correct the way I drew it there. So there's some reasons to like that one. So I'll leave it green. But now we push up there, we turn down first entry, we pull back, we get a second entry, and you get this huge bearish bar. It's a really big bar, but you got enough room to get out before here, and this could be the reversal. We didn't close below the EMA, but we pushed through there relatively easy a couple of times before we came back. So this one's leading you to believe that we're at least going to come back to the trend line and may go further. And of course it just takes off and it pulls back a couple of times, and that's a fairly bearish bar, but it's a first entry again, and there's some support across here, and you want a perfect setup here from this point on, and you just don't get it. And you finally get a nice setup here. Notice that you you actually get a close outside, so you may, but you're probably going to get a retest. So look what happens. This is the first real convincing close outside, and you get a first entry, you pull back, you get a second entry, a nice bearish bar. It's a really big bar, but needless to say, it's a bearish bar. You might let it break lower and drop a limit order. You could have gotten filled in this one way back here and taken a lot of risk off that one. But either way, you actually get a lower high here, but that's way too bullish. And of course, this is getting into that noon hour right here. But notice what happens. We come back up and we find resistance there. We make a lower high, and it actually broke higher and turns and goes out the other side. I like that one. Just to, if nothing else, you're probably going to get a second leg down like this one. And it could reverse then, but it may keep, you never know. It may continue to go lower. It may go sideways. And you see you get a little more than a measured move there, and then it bounces. And you actually get a reversal here. And you could probably, if you've got enough room here, you might take that one. But when you get in a range like this, and you're kind of going sideways, the middle is where you got to be very, very careful. So I didn't like that one. I didn't mark it either. I would have liked going short here if you had a little better bar. If this bar would have looked like this one, I'd say go short right there, because you've really got a double test in here. But that bar ends so neutral, and then by the time you get way down here, it's just not worth fooling with. Nice move down. And I talked about this a minute ago. We did break lower here. It's probably going to come back, but you want a really good setup, and that bar is just too neutral. And of course, you see it works, but don't take that, and don't beat yourself up if you missed it, because you did the right thing if you didn't take it. And I don't have a little trend line on here, but there's a little trend working up right here. Then you get your close outside, move to a new high, and you got a nice bearish bar right there. So I like that one. We're probably coming back to the other side. You actually get your lower highs, which is what you prefer here, but again, it's too bullish. You got to skip that one. You get a reversal pattern here, but you don't want to be going short right into that, even though it works, because it could just hit right there and bounce and go up. It actually would have worked, but notice how it bounces back up, and that's what usually happens when you're in a range. And it does end up going lower, but that gets you into the 2 o'clock hour. So I didn't mark anything after that. And there's really no decent setup here. It actually went lower here before it broke higher, I think, and then went back down. So the second entry triggered below this really neutral bar. So I just don't think there's a setup there that time of day you want to be fooling with. So you had your opportunity already. And again, this one is really, I mean, right just after the news break, but you can tell there's not a real, I don't think there was anything that caught anybody off surprise, and with the FOMC news coming out, so it just didn't really have a big effect. But you don't know that going into it, so you got to be real careful and probably want to be flat going into it. You might hang on to a runner, but even then it can get dangerous, because something crazy could happen, and you may not get filled or something, and it may take off, or who knows. You just got to be real careful. So generally, I would say try to be flat. I like to be, say, an hour ahead of time, but definitely 30 minutes into it. If the FOMC is at 1 o'clock noon or 1 o'clock Central Standard Time, then noon may be when you want to get out, but definitely by 12:30, go ahead and be flat, because sometimes it'll go into a little tight range like that right there and just get stuck there, and you can't get out because you're not going to reach your profit, and you get stuck in it, and then you don't want to hold it, so you don't want to take a loss. So you got to be careful. You got to make sure you got enough time for something to happen, and that's why I like to say noontime. So keep that in mind. I wanted to show you one other thing a trader sent me here from yesterday, and I probably didn't, maybe I didn't talk about it, I can't remember, but this is what we kind of had yesterday. It's really kind of flat here, and there's a little range, and he wanted to know why. And the trade really could fool anybody, a good trader, but notice we got a little failed break higher there, and I marked that one, and then we got a failed break here with a little bitty bar, and I marked that one, and then we came back a couple of times. I can't remember if I marked But this is the one he was talking about. Let me make it a little bit bigger here. You want to know why I didn't mark this trade? Because it's right off the trend line. Well, the reason that I like these versus this one is because you got clear resistance here and you failed, and it is right along the trend line. So you got both of those kind of aiding you, but you got the failed break higher for sure. On this one, you don't have a second entry. It's your first bearish bar, but notice how you're still trading up through there. You might could argue you got a close outside right there, but it's not very convincing. So it's very dangerous taking a first entry right there after you've already had a close outside and more than one leg down to a new low. You got it, because this is where a lot of times reversals will happen. And so you got to be really, really careful. And you want a really nice setup with probably a trap here. And you just don't have that. You do have some resistance here. Notice that resistance, a little lower resistance, but there's no real failed break higher that is going to trap a bunch of people and then turn down. And so I would skip that one. That's the reason I didn't mark that one. If you'd have taken it, it would have went down. It would have only broke one tick higher. So depending on where you had your stop, most people are going to put it one tick above. So you would have got stopped out on that one, even though it worked. So that's why a lot of times you want to make sure you get, you can't enter too early, in other words. So, but at the same time, if you did get fooled there, if anybody else got fooled there, there is a hidden second entry there. You could infer, because notice there's a move up, then it corrects, and then another move up. So you could infer that there's a hidden second entry there. It is off the trend line, but with us already having a close outside and more than one leg down to a new low, and we're actually kind of going sideways here too, I would want a perfect setup, and you just don't have that here. It's not a it looks nice, and you could infer there's a hidden second entry and all that, but it could have just broke one tick lower and then traded and went on up, or got a close outside and then went on up. But it's just not a very good setup, so that's the reason I didn't mark it. So if you got fooled there, or you didn't, or if you, I wouldn't beat yourself up over it, because it looks, I mean, there's some reasons to like that entry, but you're being a little aggressive there by not waiting on a perfect setup. So, and when you get aggressive, you're going to have some that fool you. And so that's the way I would describe that one. So if you got fooled there, nobody else asked about it, I don't believe. I think he was the only one. So, but it's just easier sometimes to explain it in the video. So maybe that'll help him if he watches the video tonight, and to better understand why. I think, let me go back here one more time. I think what he was trying to understand, he's fairly new to this, I believe, was why these two were okay, but I didn't like this one. What was the difference? And there is a difference. And so the real key here, these are failed breaks above the trading out of that strong resistance right there. And this one didn't fail. If this one would have broke up and gave you a nice bearish bar, you know, you really need a failed break where it closes and traps a bunch of people. Notice how these went higher here. Both of these were going higher, and that's where you start to trap people. When you're just bouncing around and getting a bunch of stems up there, you don't necessarily trap a lot of people. So hopefully that makes sense. But anyway, that's the reason this one is slightly different than these two. So I hope that makes sense. And again, if you did get trapped there, I wouldn't beat yourself up over it, because it that could fool me. I mean, sometimes I try to get aggressive and kick myself afterwards because I do something stupid and it comes back to haunt you. So when you're aggressive, one thing about being aggressive is that when you get it right, a lot of times it pays off big time. But when you get it wrong, you get slapped for it, and that's just part of it. But the one thing that I really like to get aggressive on are failed breaks, because going back to this same trade, where was it? Where'd it go? I must have deleted the trend line, I guess. Oh no, here it is right here. I'm sorry. But going back to these failed breaks, notice that if you'd have caught either one of those, probably not this one, but definitely this one, if you'd have caught this one, that's a major high for that period of time, and you trade down from there from maybe just after 8 o'clock to maybe after 9 something. So that's a solid hour of downtrend. And a lot of times you'll catch the high or low of the day. Here's a really good example. Look right here. This was a failed break higher. And if you catch this, I mean, that's when that's when it's worth being a little bit aggressive, when you can catch those kind of. So I love those, especially if it's like near the low of the day or the high of the day. Here's another one where you got a little failed break up and it's the high of the day. And look, we traded down for all the rest of that afternoon and into the next morning. And so those are the ones you want to watch for. Same thing here. You get that. This is not really a good trading range, but you make that high. So when you find those at the high or low of the day, they're really great places to enter. So keep that in mind. But I'm going to wrap it up. We'll be back again to do it tomorrow and wrap up our week. This is Mac with PriceActionTradingSystem.com, and we'll see you next time.